The piercing chill of the Swiss Alps, even in the cusp of spring, was a constant reminder of nature's raw power. Jean-Pierre, a man sculpted by the mountains, his face a road map of wrinkles etched by sun and wind, his hands calloused from years of guiding and climbing, felt a primal connection to this rugged landscape. For him, the mountains were not merely a backdrop, but a living, breathing entity, a source of solace and a repository of memories, especially those of his late wife, Isabelle. He brought Sophie here today, not just for a hike, but to share that connection, to let Isabelle's spirit, which seemed to linger in every whispering pine and towering peak, embrace their daughter. Sophie, however, remained withdrawn, her youthful energy dimmed by the lingering shadow of grief. Her bright eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, now held a quiet sadness, a constant reminder of the void Isabelle had left behind. As they ascended, the serenity they sought quickly evaporated. The gentle breeze morphed into a gale, carrying icy shards that stung their faces. The sky, once a brilliant azure, transformed into a swirling gray canvas, threatening to engulf them in a blinding whiteout. "Papa, maybe we should turn back," Sophie murmured, her voice barely audible above the rising wind. Jean-Pierre, his brow furrowed with concern, considered her words. He was no stranger to the unpredictable nature of the mountains, but the speed with which this storm had descended was unsettling. Safety was paramount, but something in Sophie's voice, a hint of resignation, spurred him onward. He knew that retreating would only deepen her melancholy, reinforce her sense of loss. He decided to press on, just a little further, hoping to find a sheltered spot where they could wait out the worst of the storm. It was then, nestled at the base of an ancient, gnarled oak, its branches bowed low under the weight of snow, that they saw it. A tiny ball of fur, barely discernible against the white expanse, shivering uncontrollably. Jean-Pierre approached cautiously, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and pity. He recognized the creature as a lynx kitten, its fur matted with ice, its eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. It was painfully thin, its ribs clearly visible beneath its snow-dusted coat. Sophie gasped, her eyes widening with a mixture of surprise and compassion. "Papa, it's a baby lynx! It's all alone! We have to help it!" Jean-Pierre hesitated. He knew the harsh realities of the wild, the unforgiving laws of nature that dictated survival. Interfering could disrupt the delicate ecosystem, alter the natural order. He also knew the challenges of raising a wild animal, the sacrifices it would require, the potential dangers it could pose. "Sophie, chérie, it is the way of nature," he said, his voice laced with a hint of reluctance. "The wild is not always kind. Sometimes it is best to let things take their course." But as he looked into Sophie's eyes, he saw not just compassion, but a desperate longing, a deep-seated need to nurture and protect. He recognized the void that Isabelle had left in her heart, the emptiness that yearned to be filled. He realized that helping this kitten was not just about saving a life, but about giving Sophie a purpose, a way to channel her grief into something positive, something meaningful. He recalled Isabelle's unwavering belief in the inherent goodness of all creatures, her unwavering commitment to helping those in need, regardless of the cost. He remembered her words, spoken with such conviction. "We are all connected, Jean-Pierre. What affects one, affects us all. We have a responsibility to care for each other, to protect the vulnerable, to ease suffering wherever we find it." Those words resonated within him, dissolving his doubts and reinforcing his conviction. He knew, in that moment, that he had no choice but to help. "All right, Sophie," he relented, his voice softening. "We will help it, but we must be careful. This is a wild animal, and we must respect its nature." With gentle hands, Jean-Pierre scooped up the shivering kitten, its body surprisingly light, its bones fragile beneath his touch. It whimpered softly, a plaintive sound that tugged at Sophie's heartstrings. He carefully tucked the kitten inside his jacket, close to his chest, where his body heat could offer some comfort. The journey back to their chalet was even more arduous now, the storm intensifying with each passing minute. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, the snow swirled like a blinding curtain, and the temperature plummeted, threatening to freeze them to the bone. Sophie, her face numb with cold, trudged alongside her father, her gaze fixed on the huddled form beneath his jacket. She imagined the kitten, lost and abandoned, terrified and alone, clinging to life in the face of such overwhelming adversity. She whispered words of encouragement, promising its safety and warmth, her voice barely audible above the fury of the storm. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally stumbled through the door of their chalet, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of exhaustion. The warmth of the crackling fire washed over them, thawing their frozen limbs and soothing their aching muscles. Sophie immediately sprang into action, gathering blankets, preparing a warm drink, her movements fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to help. Jean-Pierre gently placed the kitten on a soft pile of blankets near the hearth, its tiny body trembling uncontrollably. They huddled around it, their faces etched with concern, their hearts pounding with a shared hope. "What do we do now, Papa? How do we make it better?" Sophie asked, her voice filled with urgency. Jean-Pierre, drawing on his years of experience in the mountains, knew that warmth, hydration, and nourishment were essential. He prepared a mixture of warm milk and honey, carefully feeding it to the kitten with a syringe. At first, the kitten resisted, its jaws clenched tight, its body rigid with fear. But with gentle coaxing and unwavering patience, they managed to coax a few drops down its throat. Slowly, gradually, the kitten began to respond, its breathing becoming more regular, its tremors subsiding. As the hours passed, they remained vigil by the kitten's side, their eyes glued to its every movement, their hopes rising and falling with each breath. Sophie, refusing to leave its side for even a moment, christened the kitten Lumiere, Lumi, for short, a name that signified the light it had brought into their lives during this dark and tumultuous time. The storm raged outside, but inside the chalet, a sense of calm prevailed, a quiet determination to nurture and protect this fragile creature. The next few days were a whirlwind of constant care and unwavering devotion. They fed Lumi every few hours, cleaned her, and showered her with affection. They whispered words of encouragement, sang gentle lullabies, and stroked her soft fur, offering her comfort and reassurance. Slowly but surely, Lumi began to thrive, her eyes regaining their sparkle, her body gaining strength, her spirit blossoming with renewed vitality. Sophie, completely captivated by Lumi's playful antics and unwavering resilience, formed an unbreakable bond with the kitten. They were inseparable, two kindred spirits finding solace and companionship in each other's presence. Jean-Pierre watched them, his heart swelling with a mixture of joy and sadness. He saw in their bond a reflection of the love he had shared with Isabelle, a reminder of the joy and laughter that had once filled their home. He realized that Lumi, in her own small way, was helping them heal, helping them to rediscover the beauty and wonder of the world after suffering such profound loss. He knew that Lumi's arrival was not merely a coincidence, but a gift, a sign that even in the darkest of times, hope can emerge, and love can prevail. But he also knew that their time with Lumi was finite, that she was destined for a life beyond their chalet, a life in the wild, where she belonged. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder of the difficult decision they would eventually have to make. As Lumi grew stronger and more independent, Jean-Pierre knew that the time was approaching when they would have to prepare her for her return to the wild. He knew that it would be a painful process, a wrenching goodbye, but he also knew that it was the right thing to do, the most loving thing they could do for her. He dreaded the moment he would have to break the news to Sophie, to shatter her illusion of a forever friendship, to explain the harsh realities of the wild. One evening, as they sat by the fire, watching Lumi chase a ball of yarn, Jean-Pierre took a deep breath and braced himself for the conversation he knew he had to have. "Sophie, chérie," he began, his voice soft but firm. "Lumi is growing stronger every day. She is learning to hunt, to explore, to be a wild lynx again." Sophie's smile faltered, her eyes clouding with a hint of apprehension. "Yes, Papa," she replied, her voice barely audible. "And that is a wonderful thing," Jean-Pierre continued, carefully choosing his words. "But it also means that soon, she will need to return to the forest, to live the life she was meant to live." Sophie's face crumpled, her eyes filling with tears. "But Papa, I don't want her to leave," She's my best friend. I love her so much. Jean-Pierre reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. I know, Sophie, he said, his voice filled with compassion. I know how much you love her. But Lumi is not a pet. She is a wild animal, and she needs to be free. Keeping her here, confining her to our chalet, would be unfair to her, a denial of her true nature. Sophie shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I don't want her to go, she sobbed. I want her to stay with us forever. Jean-Pierre pulled her close, holding her tight as she wept. He knew that no words could truly ease her pain, that she would have to grieve the loss of her friend. But he also knew that he had to be strong, that he had to guide her through this difficult time, to help her understand the importance of letting go. It is not easy, Sophie, he said, his voice laced with emotion. But sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting go, allowing someone to find their own path, even if it means saying goodbye. He explained to her that they had given Lumi a second chance at life, that they had nursed her back to health and helped her rediscover her wild instincts. Now, it was time for her to embrace her destiny, to become the lynx she was meant to be. Together, Jean-Pierre and Sophie began the painstaking process of preparing Lumi for her return to the wild. They took her on longer and longer walks into the forest, teaching her to hunt, to forage, to navigate the terrain. They showed her how to find shelter, how to avoid danger, how to survive in the unforgiving wilderness. With each passing day, Lumi grew more confident, more independent, more attuned to her natural surroundings. Sophie, watching her thrive, felt a mixture of pride and sadness. She was proud of Lumi for embracing her wild nature, but she was heartbroken at the thought of losing her. She knew that the day of their final goodbye was fast approaching, and she dreaded it with every fiber of her being. The moment finally arrived on a crisp spring morning, the air filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. They took Lumi to a secluded meadow, bathed in sunlight, surrounded by towering trees. Sophie knelt down, her eyes filled with tears, and embraced Lumi one last time. I love you, Lumi, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Be brave, be strong, and be free. She released Lumi, watching as she hesitated for a moment, then turned and bounded away, disappearing into the undergrowth. Sophie stood there, her heart aching, her eyes fixed on the spot where Lumi had vanished. Jean-Pierre placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his own eyes glistening with tears. She is free now, Sophie, he said softly. She is where she belongs. They turned and walked back towards their chalet, their footsteps heavy, their hearts filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. The days that followed were difficult, filled with longing and memories of Lumi. Sophie missed her playful antics, her warm cuddles, her constant companionship. She missed the joy and laughter that Lumi had brought into their lives. Jean-Pierre did his best to comfort her, reminding her of the good they had done for Lumi, of the difference they had made in her life. As time passed, the sharp edges of Sophie's grief began to soften. She realized that Lumi's spirit would always be with her, that her memory would forever be etched in her heart. She learned to find comfort in the beauty of the mountains, in the whispering of the wind through the trees, in the knowledge that Lumi was out there, roaming free, living the life she was meant to live. And every now and then, as she hiked through the forests, she would catch a glimpse of a lynx, its eyes mirroring the wild beauty of the landscape. She would stop and watch, her heart filled with a sense of peace and contentment, knowing that somewhere out there, Lumi was thriving, a symbol of resilience, freedom, and the enduring power of love. Years later, on Sophie's 16th birthday, Jean-Pierre presented her with a small, hand-carved wooden lynx, its features capturing the same wild spirit they had both witnessed in Lumi. To remind you, he said, his voice thick with emotion, that sometimes the greatest love we can show is in letting go. Sophie smiled, tears